Welcome back to Spreadsheets and Sliders, where the GMs are sharp, the Sims are cruel, and we're all just looking for spreadsheet glory in a virtual world.
We're your hosts. I'm Aaron Mariners, and with me is Jacob Red Sox.
We're back at the deadline for a breakdown of what Top Shelf looks like after a relatively quiet trade season. We'll take a look at how the postseason races are shaping up, note the significant moves made, and touch on some of the players that have defined 2031 so far.
Headlighting this year's trade acquisitions is third baseman Daniel Cuvée, formerly of Cincinnati, who was dealt to Atlanta in exchange for the number 90 ranked prospect Alexis Zapata, as well as a pitching prospect. Cuvée gives Atlanta the only bat to boast 80 plus grade power against both hands and should immediately boost them ahead of the other NL East contenders.
Yeah, Cuvée has been one of the premier power bats in Top Shelf ever since he was drafted. I mean, last year he was incredible. He had a great first year in the majors with leading the league in home runs with 56, but last year he was on pace for something even better if he wasn't injured. Had 40 home runs, 80 RBIs, and 72 runs in only 86 games played. Now, he's obviously a little bit off that pace this year, but not by much. 65 runs, 34 home runs, and 71 RBIs, all in 100 games played so far in 2031. Juve has been one of those guys that you know can produce runs and can hit an elite level, and I think this is a home run type of pickup for Atlanta.
Yeah, he's probably going to slot in at DH for Atlanta to start at least, just because they have a top prospect in Marco Linares at first base, and Austin Riley still plays plus defense at third. So even though Cuvée, can play well against both hands, he plays well at multiple positions. So he might just be replacing Willie Abreu at that DH spot to start.
Yeah, that seems like the most likely outcome right now. Abreu hitting just a hair under league average at the moment, and definitely you're getting a big offensive upgrade by putting Cuvée there right now. The other additions in the NL East come from Cincinnati as well, this time to the Miami Marlins. 26-year-old Jonathan Russell is expected to slot in behind Eric Veras to hopefully bolster an otherwise disappointing Miami rotation this year, and reliever JJ Goss should help supply the bullpen with depth in this type division race. Cincy, on the other hand, gets three prospects back in that deal.
Yeah, there's three prospects in return. None of them are anything too special. Justin James is 24-year-old. Anthony Murphy is kind of interesting just because he has a really strong defense and some good power potential to go still. The only real promising guy that I see out of that trade is Manny Zepeda. He's in high A right now, and he's only 22 with another 25 potential power to go. Since he's looking basically just for prospects across the board, could be in just large quantity. They're looking for volume and hoping that some guys stick. So this is a pretty easy move for Cincinnati to make, trading two players to Miami in exchange for some prospects that could turn out.
Definitely. And I think that all these moves that have been happening so far in the NL East is really exciting because this is one of the tighter divisions in baseball. You have three teams above 500. The New York Mets are actually not even that much further out at 6.5. And with the top two teams, the Braves and the Marlins, making deals, it's going to be pretty exciting to see down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Estrada is still leading, or not leading, but second in the league in batting average, only behind Zach Green of Arizona. And he's been a huge producer in Miami for the last 3 years. One of the main reasons that they've been able to go so far in the playoffs constantly. He was signed to an extension after last year for another 6 years. And that right there shows that, since Aaron Estrada is only 26 years old, Miami's hoping to be in the deep playoff runs for the foreseeable future.
Philadelphia, on the other hand, also started slow, but they haven't really yet recovered, and that led to a full sell at the deadline. Fernando Tatis Jr., who was acquired last year, ended up in Baltimore, while Carlos Marcano went with Andrew Painter to the Detroit, and the White Sox acquired bench bat Justin Berry from Philly as well.
Barry was an interesting free agent. He was a minor league free agent this year, ended up signing with Philadelphia on a 1 year deal. And it's good that we sort of have an idea as to which direction Philly is going at this point. The last couple years have been up and down, wondering whether Philly can actually contend or whether they, want to build off their young players and sell some of these veterans. It looks like finally we have our answer. They're 32 games under 500 right now, which is unfortunate for such an expensive roster, but at least Philly will be getting some good prospects back in return. Ricky Gonzalez, coming from Baltimore, was an outfielder that I had my eye on as well. He's definitely promising, has green development for the last couple of months. They're also going to be acquiring John McGuire and Alan Daly coming over from Baltimore. From Detroit, Philly's going to be picking up the number 53 rated prospect, Matt Thurman, who was just drafted last year in the first round, 7th overall. He's an extreme ground ball pitcher. He's been developing actually at a pretty good rate. He should be reaching double A possibly in the next year or so. We should be seeing him in the majors probably by 2033, maybe 2034 at the latest. He's already at 35.71 according to my scout, and he'll do great alongside Brian Bales in Philadelphia to form that formidable 1-2 core now that Painter's gone. Now, Washington and New York did stay quiet at the deadline this year, but they're both still within reach of both the division and the wild card races.
For sure. We previously mentioned how the Mets are only 6.5 out, but Washington, as of recording, is actually only 3.5 out. They're over 500 at 58 and 54, which is a big turnaround compared to the last couple of years where they've been pretty much basement dwellers and not really in the playoff picture at all. They're riding another strong season out of Noah Schultz. He won the Cy Young last year in dominant fashion. Not quite as strong this year, but truthfully, the difference in performance isn't that big. He's still definitely a bona fide ace. On the other hand, you finally have some players all across the roster going along with the ride and contributing 2 wins. Michael King is doing great in the number 2 slot. You have basically the entire rotation is second in the NL in starters ERA, and guys that are typically excellent like James Wood and Logan O'Hoppe are all driving an offense that actually is putting up some runs this year compared to previous.
The Mets, I would say, though, are a little more lucky than good. They're scoring in the bottom third of almost every statistical category in the NL. And even though they're only 2 games under 500, if your metrics aren't looking that great, then you can't be expected to perform at that level going forward. They are still getting really good production out of their 37-year-old closer, Edwin Diaz. He's already up to 18 saves on the year. His ERA is still under 3. And when you pair that with a fantastic free agent signing, which they got out of Bryce Eldridge, who's still on pace to get another 32 home runs this year, you're looking at a chance, an outside chance at reaching the playoffs. Even though those outside metrics don't look great, you still have the star power to make it there, and the Mets are streaky in that way. There is a chance that they can make it, but they'll have to rely on a little more consistency down the stretch. Currently in the division, Miami trails Atlanta by 1 game, and while both teams are celebrating relatively injury-free seasons, we still expect this division race to come right down to the wire in September.
Staying out east but switching leagues, we have the Baltimore Orioles, who are another team that made a big splash this trade deadline. They acquired a couple of really big veteran names in Tarek Skubal in a trade with Houston and Tatis, previously mentioned, in a trade with Philadelphia. Both of these guys are expected to put some veteran presence in the clubhouse and help them secure a wildcard spot, which Baltimore has surprisingly found itself in position for in the AL.
Yeah, Scooble coming over to Baltimore was more of a cap move by Houston. They just wanted to get Scooble off their payroll and attach some prospects in order to get it done. The move with Philadelphia was a little more interesting for Baltimore. They acquired Tatis and Sterling Paddock. They're not paying anything for Paddock because the 50% that has been retained by Philadelphia is on top of the other 50% that's being retained by Seattle right now. But having to give up 2, possibly 3 really strong prospects for Tatis, you just really need to hope that the last 3 years of Tatis's deal are going to pay off for you. And he is fragile, which is a little bit unfortunate, but he still plays decent defense, and he's off to a good rebound this year after a down year last year.
Yeah, Baltimore really is trying to take advantage, it looks like, with some shrewd moves of a relatively weak bottom of the American League, as they only find themselves 2.5 games out of that third wildcard spot despite being under 500. Now, the one thing that they're going to have to watch for is that they are currently overperforming their Pythagorean record by about 5 games at the time of this recording, which suggests there may be some regression coming in the near future. But wins are wins, and if Baltimore is trying to take advantage, I think this is a decent way to do so, considering that they actually gained prospects in taking on a veteran arm in Skubal that does seem like he has some stuff left in the tank.
Yeah, I mean, Baltimore is definitely a home heavy team. If you look at their splits, they're pretty poor on the road. And that's obviously not great if you need a balanced approach. But if you can get into the playoffs on a home field advantage, then that's at least working in your favor if you're a really strong home team. I know that in Seattle just because, certain ballpark factors, end up signing free agents that, play toward the ballpark, whether it be for needing ground ball pitchers or needing fly ball hitters or whatever you need. So Baltimore might not be as bad off as we think, but definitely looking at the numbers right now, they'll need to sort of even that out as we go down the stretch.
the only other team in the AL East that actually made a move. We have Tampa Bay, who is sitting in last in the AL East, but they do have most of their young guys playing in the majors and performing, looking to set a foundation for future success. Guys like Nick Corbin are finally coming into their own. Unfortunately, he does seem to have some elbow inflammation that happened right at the time of this recording, but after a rocky introduction to the majors last year, he is pitching great in his first 22 starts, on track to be much closer to above league average than below.
Yeah, Tampa only shipped off Chad Brennan, the relief pitcher. He was doing very, very well this season. Huge bounce back from last year, where in 26 games he pitched to about an 8.5 ERA. Tampa's not in contention right now, and so it's in their best interest to ship off players who are performing well to contenders that might be able to give them something back in return. In this case, Tampa was able to get back a couple of prospects, most notably second baseman Mike Defoe, who by OSA is 3173. I don't have him anywhere close to that by my scout, but this certainly, when you have a player even with high OSA ratings, it means that some scouts see that similarly.
For sure. And one thing that actually drove Tampa Bay is that they were in first for a while to start the year before coming back down to earth a little bit. But their pitching foundation right now seems like it's very solid. Chase Burns is, again, typically excellent. Nick Corbin, like we mentioned, doing pretty well. Even Juan Valera, who was mentioned in previous podcasts with his extremely unique pitching profile, is pitching close to a league average rate. And the bullpen has been pretty dominant for Tampa Bay this year, being third in ERA total, even after shipping out Chad Brennan. So it's something that they're going to have to look at in order to get their offense to catch up to their pitching before they can get into a contention window.
Now, the Yankees, even though they're 23 games under 500 right now, do still have a couple bright spots. Jason Dominguez, who they brought back on a 5-year deal coming off this past free agent class, is actually performing really well. He's on pace for almost 5 WAR, which would be his best season since 2029. And he's right there in the heart of the Yankee lineup, putting up great numbers. Toronto's going to have a little bit of financial freedom too coming into the next off season. They currently have $65 million free, still working with a primarily young lineup. The rotation has been one of the bright spots, even though they're 11th in starters ERA. You still have Yumin Lin and Drew Rasmussen carrying that load right now. Carlos Contreras has had 2 really fantastic seasons, but he's having a bit of a down year right now, rocking a 4.39 ERA. Toronto is fortunate in that they have Eric Reiselman back healthy for the first time in a little while, but he's unfortunately not playing very well. He's got a 7.3 ERA right now, and an inconsistent back of the bullpen just really can't nail down wins, even if your starters end up giving you a lot of depth early in the game.
Yeah, I think a lot of Toronto's troubles come in the fact that their defensive ratings are at the bottom or near the bottom of the AL in pretty much every category. They have some average total pieces in terms of runs scored, starters ERA, bullpen ERA. Altogether, they're closer to a 500 team than not if you look at that. But when you have sloppy defensive performances, it just turns tie games into blowouts and close games into losses. But right now, when they're 20 games out of first, Toronto is going to be looking at the draft and at retooling during the offseason.
Yeah, finally up here in Boston, leading the division by a hefty amount. Didn't make any major moves at the deadline. But other than that rotation, the roster's looking pretty healthy.
Yeah, Boston has been fortunate this year. Last year, we were really hurt by the injury to Roman Anthony midway through the year. Knocking on wood that doesn't happen again, as he has turned fragile after that shoe-tying kneecap fracture incident. But in his return, he and Junior Caminero have really driven the offense. Masahiro Onishi has been pretty good so far in his first time in the major leagues. He was the international free agent that was signed in the offseason for a big amount of cash. And he's doing pretty well, so we're going to hope that continues. But for the most part, Boston didn't really have too much to do. We are currently leading the division by 16 games. And while there, like you mentioned, are a few things that maybe want to be shored up in the rotation, which has normally been a pretty big strength of Boston's, when you're leading by this much, in a sense, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we'll just kind of toy around with those spots as we go through, but there's no real big major additions needed.
Switching over to the AL Central now, Detroit, who picked up Carlos Marcano and Andrew Painter from Philadelphia, are only 2 games under 500. They're rocking a six-man rotation right now, and their pitching hasn't been fantastic. But I think their GM realized that all of a sudden the team is in prime position to land one of those wild card spots.
Yeah, Detroit actually surprisingly is second in the league in runs scored, and it really does seem like the Detroit GM does not want to waste such a prolific offense. I think it was a really, really nice pickup for him to grab both Painter and Marcano. Painter is a little bit expensive in the sense that he is going to have an escalating salary up for the next 4 years, but he's been a pretty reliable pitcher for the most part, even though he's having a slightly down year so far. But particularly Marcano is one that I was very surprised in the first place that Philly parted with, but I think is going to be a huge, huge pickup for Detroit.
Yeah, the Detroit offense is very impressive. Number one in batting average, number one in on base percentage, and number three tied for third in home runs across the AL. They're basically at the doorstep of trying to compete with the other wildcard teams. Chicago's so far ahead right now, and Chicago did end up making a move of their own by picking up Justin Berry from Philadelphia. Both of these teams benefited from the sell-off in Philly. But the White Sox, they have a pretty well-rounded squad. They've added a couple players from the last deadline and last offseason. They're adding Barry now to add some depth to that lineup. The White Sox are definitely primed to continue their upward trend toward the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the White Sox GM is thanking his lucky stars that his moves have finally worked out. Because, to be honest with you, when he made most of his acquisitions last year and over the last offseason, they made sense. But unfortunately, the team was never really able to put it together over the course of the 2030 season. But in 2031, all those pieces that he picked up are now really starting to pay dividends. Starting pitcher Corbin Burns has been really, really great. Chang Hao Guao, who was signed for big money to stabilize the closer position, has been super good. And Riley Green is finally hitting in that Chicago uniform. So the addition of a guy like Barry, who has pretty good ratings overall and should be a good investment, whether he's on a bench or as a spot starter, really makes me think that Chicago should be elite heading into the end of the year.
Yeah, and this is without Cooper Pratt, who's been out for a majority of the season. He's only played 40 games this year due to a torn labrum. He's still going to be out until the middle of September. He's probably going to just have to do a rehab assignment, and he'll be back for the playoffs, fortunately. But between Pratt and Aaron Judge, Chicago is rocking a 68-44 record without two of their best pieces.
Now, in between these two teams, actually, is the team in the second wildcard spot in the AL, the Minnesota Twins. They're 57 and 55 and didn't make any major moves at the deadline. But to be honest with you, their team is doing pretty well without it. Now, they don't have a super prolific offense, but their pitching has been stellar across the board for the most part, above average in every regard. And John Klein, their ace, has continued to be excellent at the top of the rotation.
Yeah, Friner Mejias is part of this two-headed stopper strategy that Minnesota is going for right now. He had a decent start to his major league career last year, but was a little bit unlucky with his outside metrics. This year, he's on pace for 137 innings as a primary reliever. When you combine him with David Hageman in that other stopper role, you have a fantastic back half of the bullpen right there to be able to convert leads from John Klein and David Festa at the front of the rotation.
Yeah, and I think it's also always important to call out unique strategies like this when they manifest. And this double stopper, no closer role with the setup men coming in the sixth inning is really, really interesting and has been actually translating to wins so far as they've basically been sharing saves all up and down the bullpen.
Yeah, offensively, Minnesota hasn't been super impressive. They are starting to get some contributions out of their younger players. Mike Beninati, the right fielder, has started to come into his own, putting up a 766 OPS so far over the majority of the season.
Past Minnesota, we have the Kansas City Royals, who are one of the stranger teams in this division. Last year they made the playoffs. It doesn't look like they're trending towards that this year, as they're a fair bit out of the wild card race with a few teams in front of them. However, despite being 51 and 62, they do have the number 6 run scoring offense and the number 3 starters ERA. So they do have a foundation that's very good. Unfortunately, they are being let down right now by a 10th ranked in the AL bullpen, and this is leading to some blown leads and blown games. Their expected record is actually significantly higher than what it currently is, and I'd be really interested to see whether or not Kansas City kind of trends back towards what those metrics suggest and makes a late run for one of those wildcard spots.
Yeah, Bobby Witt Jr. has actually gotten a little bit of support from his lineup this year. Graham Seaberg and Braylon Morrell are providing pretty strong sophomore campaigns for each of them. Seaberg is on pace for 3.3 WAR. He's locking down that third base slot, and Braylon Morrell has actually put up really good numbers this year. He is up to a 112 OPS plus and 23 home runs, which would mark a career high for him both in the majors and the minors. And so with these two performing, Kansas City isn't really missing Tom Diana as much like we were talking about at the beginning of the year. We thought that he would be a central part of their power core this year, and he ended up not doing so well in the majors. He's been bouncing around back and forth, but it hasn't seemed to turn off that Kansas City offense, as all but one of their primary starters have an OPS plus over 100.
Definitely. I think they're going to be one of those teams to watch as the year finishes to see how they actually end up in the standings. Moving on to the final team in the AL Central, we have the Cleveland Guardians. Now, unfortunately, their year hasn't quite gone to plan after the big signing of Kazufumi Kuriyama, but the good news for them is that he's been just as good as advertised. Pretty much, in my opinion, he's the current Cy Young favorite, pitching to a 181 ERA plus, 220 ERA, and 23 outings. It took him, I think, almost 120 innings for him to give up his first home run. I mean, truthfully, he's been absurd to start his career. The problem, however, has been that Cleveland hasn't been able to back him up with a real offense or, honestly, pieces around him. The rest of the rotation hasn't been great, and the Cleveland offense is last in the AL in runs scored and in pretty much every relevant metric.
Yeah, Cleveland unfortunately has dealt with some injuries to that starting rotation. Tim Katucci is on the toward the end of his rehab assignment right now, and he should be back up in the majors as of the second week of August, which would be great. The pitching could definitely use a boost. Unfortunately, even with the great efforts of Kuriyama and Katucci, it might be too late for the Guardians. They're 20 games out of the division and still 7 games back of that third wildcard spot. I know that you and I both hope, Jacob, that Cleveland will be able to reverse their unlucky fortunes from last year, but it has unfortunately just been more of the same. It's not a really fantastic team on offense or defense, and the pitching, like you said, has been inconsistent and dealing with injuries. So at this point, Cleveland's really just looking to next year. They do have a couple of exciting prospects that'll probably come up in the next year or two with Eric Altum and John Jameson, both pitchers. But for this year, Cleveland might have to start packing it up early.
Hopping across leagues to the NL Central now, we have the Cincinnati Reds, actually. They are in last place in the NL Central, but they are the ones that actually made the most moves at the deadline, shipping out third baseman Daniel Cuvée in that trade with Atlanta and starting pitcher Jonathan Russell over to Miami. Those moves suggest, not just suggest, they signal that Cincy is in a full rebuild mode, but they did pick up a few decent prospects in return.
Yeah, as mentioned before, Atlanta sent over 2 prospects in that Cuvée trade. Alexis Zapata is the headliner of the deal, but Takashi Kobayashi, the other player who's coming over, even though he's out injured right now, he still has some promise. He was a minor league signing out of Japan with the Braves in 2027, and he's been steadily increasing through the prospect rankings. A lot of green development over the last 4 years, and now he's going to be sent over to Cincinnati to hopefully finish his development and get a taste of the major leagues.
Yeah, only time will tell whether or not the prospect stockpile that the Reds have generated over the last few years will come to fruition, but it'll be very, very interesting to watch as this is one of the more pure rebuilds here in Top Shelf. Moving up to the next team, we have the Pittsburgh Pirates. Unfortunately, they are underperforming again this year in fourth place. Didn't make too many moves at the deadline, and they are still basically sitting in the middle of their own rebuild.
Yeah, I was hoping that Pittsburgh would be a little bit more exciting this year just because of the speed at which they're developing prospects. They have Connor Griffin still performing at a really high level, and he's only 25 years old. But when you pair Griffin with Howell Wheeling coming into the majors for the first time this year, and Alexis Ochoa, who's the #1 prospect, he was doing pretty well this year in the majors with a 123 OPS plus before he got hurt. He's now fragile, unfortunately, and he's going to be hurt for a little bit longer, a few more weeks. Unfortunately, that just means that Pittsburgh isn't all that we made them out to be coming into the year. Now, Chicago is holding on to that second wild card spot. They're only a game behind St. Louis in the wild card standings, even though they're 7.5 back in the division. Chicago didn't make too many moves at the deadline, but they did acquire Bobby Burkhold. He was one of my relievers in Seattle, a fourth round pick for me a couple of years ago. He's ended up being pretty decent in the majors against both hands, and he's a ground baller. So, if you have a ground baller on a minimum contract and he's at decent ratings. I have him at 54, 62. I'm sure that the GM of the Cubs has him at a similar rating. Otherwise, he wouldn't have acquired him. And he's just going to slot right into that Chicago bullpen to help shore up some of those weak spots in the middle relief, especially.
Yeah, Chicago actually is doing pretty well overall. They have about an average offense with a really good starting rotation, and their biggest weakness at this point in the year has been their bullpen, which is just a hair below average. And the pickup of Burkhold really should help in that department. I think it was really shrewd of him to go ahead and dip into the Seattle bank again for another reliever after he picked up Ryan Harbin from you last year. And that combined with another stellar year so far from Kazunori Kawasaki in the lineup has helped Chicago be a real contender. They are 63 and 49, so they're 14 games over 500. And if not for the Brewers who are running away with the division, they'd be one of the top seeds in all of the NL.
Yeah, Chicago has taken advantage of that offseason acquisition of Davison De Los Santos from Miami, immediately signed him to another 6-year deal, which is de escalating over the duration of the deal with a team option at the end. And for a slugger that only 2 years ago hit 45 home runs, Chicago's going to need that pop in order to make it past the wild card round and through to the deeper rounds of the playoffs. Now, unfortunately, De Los Santos has missed a little bit of time this year and he is fragile, but he's still slotted in at that DH, which should help protect him a little bit from injury. And at that 4 hole right behind Kawasaki, he'll also be able to clean up when there's runners on base.
Moving on to the other team that's very close to them in the standings, the St. Louis Cardinals are just a hair above the Cubs at 64 and 48, and they're also having a great bounce back season, even after the departure of David Gurray.
Yeah, Luis Gastelum has become their bona fide ace over the last couple of years. Originally a bullpen contributor back when Cheng Hao Guo was in the rotation. He ended up in the rotation and has just gotten better over time. He's unfortunately fragile nowadays, but he is on pace for 183 innings and 5 WAR this year, off the back of 2 All-Star nods over the past 2 seasons. One of the best things about St. Louis's lineup is the contributions of their younger players. We've talked ad nauseum about Facundo Velasquez, who's played center field for them since he came up 3 years ago, and he's still in arbitration as a 70-70, insanely good center fielder. He's on pace for at least a 2020 campaign, possibly up to 30 home runs, and he plays fantastic defense. He's right there in the 2 hole, right ahead of Jordan Walker and right behind JJ Weatherholt, who's gone on to become a fantastic prospect developed into a major leaguer of his own.
Yeah, the development pipeline of St. Louis has been extremely excellent over the last few years, and these guys are driving that offense and driving the team that has been pretty good so far. Now, the runs are actually not coming that easily for St. Louis as they're currently sitting at 11th in runs scored in the NL, but the overall team construction does suggest they should be set up to be contenders as the year continues.
St. Louis does have a pretty consistent ERA across their starters and their bullpen. They currently rank 7th in both categories in the National League, and since they are 16 games over 500, they do still have a shot at the division. Speaking of the division, it's no surprise that Milwaukee's here at the top yet again, coming off of a World Series win last year and having lost Shane McClanahan for his career coming into this year. Milwaukee had a ton of question marks, but already we can see the contributions of the home run derby champion Caleb Denzason hitting right behind Julio Rodriguez, who's having a bounce back season of his own, on pace for 8 WAR, having come over from Seattle last year. Those two alone are completely dominating the Milwaukee offense. And when you have players like Jackson Churio and Mike Bove at the top of the lineup who have been contributing for years now, you're looking at the most formidable lineup in the National League by a long shot.
Top Shelf has seen some dominant teams over its time, but Milwaukee to this point may truly be one of the most dominant ever. They're first in almost every single offensive category except for batting average, where they're second, and stolen bases, where they're second. They're first in most pitching categories, only being third in starters ERA and eighth in strikeouts. I mean, this team right now is as complete as it gets, so it's not surprising that they're leading even a tough division by a fairly significant margin, but it'll be up to them to maintain that pace and see if they can pull off that coveted repeat.
All right, now over to the AL West. Houston is unfortunately 29 games back in the cellar of that division. I know, Jacob, that you and I at the beginning of the season thought that Houston and Vegas would be the dark horse contenders coming out of that very competitive division, but unfortunately, it just hasn't turned out to be that way so far.
Yeah, unfortunately, the dark horses in this division for me and you are not doing so much racing at the moment, but there are some bright spots definitely to look at for them. Houston is the only one in the division that made, some significant moves out. I know that Seattle made a small move, but Houston specifically moved out Tarek Skubal. He was moved in a salary dump maneuver, which I think was beneficial for both parties. Baltimore gets a veteran starter that has some left in the tank, as mentioned, and Houston is able to actually get off of that contract and maybe position themselves better for the future. One thing to highlight with Houston specifically is that they have been really good in the R5. Starting pitcher Anferni Gonzalez, who has been pretty decent for them overall and is 44.75 by R Scout, was picked up in the 2029 R5. And second baseman Ronnie Bello, who has been pretty good and is at 58.69, was picked up in the 2028 R5 draft. So those two guys are big pieces of their future, and they were picked up basically for free. In addition, finally, Georgie Larson is getting his first taste of success in the majors as he's delivering on the promise that he's shown in his ratings and in his minor league career.
Yeah, Georgie Larson finally locked down an all-star nod this year, as did center fielder Wade Shelley. He was a former Chicago Cubs farmhand who was traded over to Houston at the beginning of last season. Put up a decent season last year in his first year in Houston, but this year he's on pace for almost 5 WAR, having really gone up in rating. He's now up to 54.54 according to my scout. OSA has him even higher in the 60s. He's played a fantastic center field. He has 6 zone ratings so far in 105 games, and he's put up almost 800 OPS. Wade Shelley, at the top of that Houston lineup, has really provided more consistency than anyone else. And speaking of consistency, we look straight at Slade Caldwell of Vegas. Only 25 years old and in his first year of salary arbitration, but he's coming off an all-star nod of his own, and he's now up into the blue ratings on pace for 7.1 WAR if all goes well toward the end of the season.
Yeah, Vegas is another team that where all the pieces haven't come together, but that doesn't mean there aren't pieces there to build around. Caldwell, as you mentioned, has been great so far this year. This is truly his coming out party, as you said. 7.1 WAR is what he's tracking for at the moment, and he's leading the AL in batting average as of this recording. So he is really one of those pieces that Las Vegas can look to build around. Unfortunately, they've been dealing with some bad luck as well. Wei and Lin, who has been, kind of a stalwart for them over the last couple of years with a pretty consistent output. Unfortunately, is at a 5.55 ERA this year in 9 starts, but a lot of that seems to be from bad luck. I mean, his expected metrics show him right around his career averages, or actually even a little bit better. So unfortunately, he just seems to be having not great batted ball luck so far this season.
Yeah, fortunately, Vegas has gotten some more contributions out of their younger arms. Mark Barnard, who has been steadily moving up the minor leagues, just hit the majors this year, and so far he's pitched to a 2.91 ERA. One of the biggest prospects that Vegas actually got a few years back from trading Tyler Soderstrom to Philadelphia is Dylan Volantis. He's 25 years old, a little bit older for a prospect to just be hitting the majors for the first time, but he's already put up 21 starts in the majors to the tune of 3.6 WAR. He's pretty well polished for a starter. He has 2+ pitches and he's working on a third, but it's really important to note that he's a ground baller with that captain personality class, both of which are a little harder to come by in a starting pitcher. Especially at 25 years old for a minimum contract, it will definitely help Vegas going into the future free agent classes to not have to worry about a couple of these starting pitchers.
We also definitely want to mention that their addition at the deadline this year was relief pitcher Chad Brennan in a trade with Tampa Bay. Brennan is a solid bullpen arm, and he really helps in the one area that Las Vegas has been extremely poor at. Their bullpen ERA is last in the AL, and a guy like that could really help set up the foundation as they end up trying to retool going into the next couple of years.
Yeah, Vegas currently doesn't really have a strong left-handed component of their bullpen. It's 80% right-handers, and then Jorge Diaz, who hasn't been very good. Um, but one of the but Chad Brennan has a 2.61 ERA against lefties this year, a full run lower versus lefties than versus righties. So he should be able to slot in right away and contribute in a major way to this Vegas bullpen as they fight for that last wild card spot. It's definitely possible, even though they're 11 games below 500, to make a run for the playoffs because they're only 4.5 back of this third wildcard spot, competing with teams like Kansas City and Seattle and Baltimore for that last spot. The bottom part of the AL has been unfortunately very weak this year, and it's made it so that some of these teams that we didn't think would be competing are actually in positions where they could be making the playoffs. You know, for me, Seattle is one of them. We weren't expecting to come anywhere close this year, and we suck at tanking, honestly. We are 51 and 61 right now, only 10 games under 500. And we did ship away one player, Bobby Burkhold, to Chicago. But otherwise, it's really just been a year that I hoped would be a building year. And, you know, it has been. But there's no way that we're going to be able to catch up to Texas and Anaheim anytime soon.
Yeah, Seattle is, as you said, I mean, it's your team, and we know that it's in a bit of a rebuilding period. Definitely still some strong players on that roster that are probably carrying you to a few more wins than, maybe you'd like in a tank year. But definitely there is progress with some of the young guys, and it'll be exciting to see what progression your franchise takes as you turn the page to a different contention window. Moving on to the two titans in the AL West, we'll talk first about Texas. Now, they didn't make any moves to the deadline. They didn't really need to. They are in second place by a fairly significant margin. However, a lot of that can be drummed up to the fact that they've missed key pieces for significant amounts of time due to injury. They missed Tyler Bremner for a little while. He's currently still injured for another couple of weeks due to a torn labrum. Shortstop Ezekiel Tovar has been injured for a while and is just coming off the IL. Nick Kurtz was also out due to a hit by pitch, and Wyatt Langford is currently on a rehab assignment. So these are really big pieces that have usually been the ones driving Texas up to those, 95, 100, 105 win markers. And while they may not reach that this year due to those injuries, they're definitely still a team to watch out for because the core is still there and the core is actually still performing very well for them.
Yeah, especially in their rotation. Their rotation currently is averaging like a 2.9 or a 3 ERA. It's very, very strong across the board. You see, the back end of the bullpen is still ridiculous as always between that Mason Miller Yuri Perez duo. Yuri Perez has been a stopper there for 4 years now or something, and even though he's wrecked, he's put up amazing numbers both in the regular season and in the playoffs. And I still won't forgive you for sending over Lyndon Harrington essentially for scraps. Marquise Andrews is a good player defensively, but he's nothing compared to what Harrington has done so far for the Rangers.
Finally, we have the Anaheim Angels, who are very solidly in first place and pretty much trying to stake their claim as the best team in the American League.
Yeah, 40 games over 500 is certainly nothing to sneeze at, and you can really attribute that to the depth of their organization. On offense, they're ranking first, if not, second in a lot of the categories. Their bullpen and starter ERA are both second in the American League. The bullpen ERA is actually at 2.67. I can't believe that that's not number one, first of all, but that's crazy low for any team, especially a team that's the top of the division like this. But if we really want to talk about what has made Anaheim so good this year, we can look at the progress of their DH prospect, Matt McCullough. He came up last year briefly and didn't do a ton, but he was the reason that Anaheim traded away Yordan Alvarez last year because they were going to give McCullough a shot, and he's obviously going to be a lot cheaper. This year, he's really turned it on. He's already got 28 home runs and a 127 OPS plus in a DH capacity. He's on pace for 2.2 WAR, again, in a DH capacity, so he's not getting that WAR boost from excellent fielding that maybe some power hitting first baseman can get. McCullough is going to end up with 40 home runs possibly and over 100 walks on the season, which is extremely impressive for any player, much less, one of 24 years of age. And if you go up and down the Anaheim roster, both for hitting and for pitching, there aren't really any clear weak spots. Even the players who aren't excellent on offense are Gold Glove caliber defenders. It's really just a real testament to that GM's thoroughness in completing the organization from top to bottom.
100%. I mean, everything that I basically said about Milwaukee when we touched on them kind of applies to Anaheim. They're tops in most categories in the AL, and there's not really a clear visible weakness for any other teams to exploit.
And to keep in mind, Jacob, Anaheim is accomplishing all this without Dominic Duncan or Brody Brecht. Both are out for the season. Chase Dollander has returned to the rotation. Will Sanders has been locked up long term. And Brody Brecht has been in that stopper role for multiple years now, having led the league in holds, games played, innings pitched as a reliever, ERA. He's been unbelievable, and he's been out for a chunk of this year, unfortunately. And Anaheim's still 40 games over. So, if it was my vote, I would be looking at a World Series between Anaheim and Milwaukee this year, but that's just because of what we've gone over here at the deadline. Now, finally, in the NL West, we have the Diamondbacks bringing up the rear of the division. Now, other than Zach Green, who's been a complete phenomenon at the top of that lineup, Arizona's been largely underwhelming this year. They have not gotten huge contributions from Christopher Torrin, who had a much better season last year, or Corbin Carroll, who's had a huge regression this year. Unfortunately, as well, AJ Gracia has had a huge drop in production this year. Last year, he put up 24.9 batting runs, whereas this year he's projected to put up minus 3.2. He's really suffering, as is the whole offense, and it doesn't really get better in the rotation either.
The rotation, unfortunately, has also just not been great overall. Only pitcher pitching well is basically Tyler Glass now, who is a wrecked minor league free agent signing at the beginning of the year. I mean, in a fill-in capacity, he's been great, but at this point, at 37 years old, he's just not the guy that you really want to rely on. And it really signals that Arizona is going to need some significant changes, at the very least on the pitching side, in order to get them to where they want to go.
Yeah, fortunately for Arizona, they do have Jacob Steinmetz returning from a season-long injury in the coming days, but we went over this at the beginning of the season. It's unfortunate that at 28 years old, he's already wrecked, and he's probably not going to get a second deal after this free agent contract expires. Honestly, losing him for the year really set Arizona back. They probably could have gotten at least 10 wins out of him. Unfortunately, though, Arizona is currently in last place in the division. Right above them, only half a game up, are the Colorado Rockies, who do have a bright spot in Jackson Baker, their number one pitching prospect, who is now coming off his second consecutive All-Star nod.
Yeah, Jackson Baker is doing great for the Rockies. It's really tough to develop pitching up there in the Mile High City, but Baker is really one of those guys that seems to have proven that he actually does have what it takes to pitch in that environment. And I'm really looking at him to be kind of the foundational piece for the rest of that rotation if Colorado looks to compete in the near future.
Yeah, Colorado's roster is pretty exciting going forward. It's cheap. That's the big deal. Is it's really cheap, and when you're working with that many young players that you're going to have under team control for a number of years in the future, then you're probably going to need to be aggressive in the coming seasons just to be able to capitalize on that competitive window. They were doing this in the NFL for a while where teams were going all in when they had a star quarterback on a rookie contract just because of how that totally skews the pay scale of all the other players. And here in Colorado, you only have Charlie Condon locked down for that huge amount of money. Now, just above the Rockies, a couple games, are the Los Angeles Dodgers. And this is the last team in the division that's separated from the sort of chances at a division crown. The Padres and Giants are still a little bit above them. But the Dodgers are on a pretty good run lately, 2-game win streak, 8-2 in their last 10. Now, unfortunately, the Dodgers are not at that peak like they have been in real life. They're 6 games under 500, and they do still have quite a few star players contributing. But even with Roki Sasaki and Yoshinobu Yamamoto, their team is largely underperforming compared to, I think, how most people thought they were going to do coming into the season.
Yeah, the Dodgers are another one of those super interesting teams to watch towards the end of the season because I know their GM has been frustrated with the way that they've performed in the recent years. But again, they're trending to be a similar team as they have been to the last couple of years. They're once again one of the top teams in runs scored. That's basically not changed in the last 3 or 4 years. They're currently ranked at second, and their starting rotation, even with a bit of a down year from Sasaki, who has been typically very excellent for them, they're only sixth in starters ERA and overall pretty decent. The problem is their bullpen ERA is 14th in the NL and very much not helping close out games. Their closer as well, Nate Snead, only has 18 saves with a 4.62 ERA. So It'll be interesting to watch, just like the Royals, actually, another blue and white team, if they can kind of reverse that trend with the bullpen performances going into the end of the year. And if they can, then they might be a dangerous team come playoff time. Finally, we're moving on to the two big boys in the division. We'll start with the San Diego Padres, who are 5 games back of first place at 62 and 50, but they've been on a pretty great run recently. And after starting a bunch of the season actually in last place, they've basically regained their top dog type of status in terms of performance here in the West.
Yeah, I mean, last year the Padres came off a division series loss, which came on the back of a championship series loss and then another division series loss. Like, they just really, really want to go over the top this year. And they should be, in a pretty good spot to do so. No major injuries across the board right now. And the offense is performing better than ever. PJ Morlando is on pace to break his career best year that he had last year. Now, one of the moves that I like here from San Diego is that they locked up Drew Romo long term. He currently doesn't provide a ton on offense, but it's enough to get by. He's really just there because of what he does on defense. Drew Romo, one of the best catchers in the league on defense, if not the best, having saved 11.1 framing runs this year with a positive zone rating at the catcher position is exceptional. He's been an all-star 2 years now, this year and in 2028, and as soon as he came over from Colorado, that really solidified that position for San Diego. It really helps out young pitchers when you have a backstop as consistent and reliable as Drew Romo. And I'm sure San Diego has relied on that heavily with the combination at the top of the rotation of Eric Yost and Diego Barrera, who are both performing excellently this year.
Yeah, Eric Yost has been great in his San Diego career so far, pitches a ton of innings, starts a ton of games for them, and the pickup of Barrera has, really borne fruit. He's on track to pitch 176 innings again this year in 36 starts, and despite that 35 stamina rating, he's having no trouble providing innings for the San Diego Padres.
Yeah, unfortunately, San Diego's getting a lot from their rookie sensation, Morton Grazier. He's been playing primarily at first base this season, hasn't put up amazing defense, but he's more than making up for it on offense. 24.1 batting runs, the projection for the end of the year, and this is his first year in the big, so he should be looking at some Rookie of the Year votes, maybe even a prospect incentive pick. We have no idea yet. He's still rated as the number 62 prospect in baseball, and he's looking at completing this year with 49 walks and 68 strikeouts. Only 68 strikeouts in 500 plate appearances is an excellent ratio, especially from a young player like Grazier.
Moving on to our final team, we have the San Francisco Giants. Now, last is certainly not least, as the Giants have picked up right where they left off last year, and they are currently leading the West and one of the best teams in baseball at 67 and 45. They're led by an extremely strong duo of Ty Horn and Braden Nett, who are numbers 2 and 3 in the NL ERA leaderboard as of this recording. And those guys anchor the number one rotation in all of baseball.
Yeah, San Francisco's been very impressive, especially since the current GM took over. Now, at the top of the lineup, Nate Barrier Reef, as we've come to be accustomed to, has been a great leadoff hitter for the Giants these last 2 years. Last year with a 346 OBP, this year slightly lower with 340, but still on track to score a ton of runs. He's been a really strong addition to that top of the lineup ever since he came up from AAA last year. He is one of the few first-round picks from that 2029 draft to make a huge impact right away on the big league level. And getting on base that frequently just allows Yordan Alvarez, one of their big free agent pickups from last year, to drive in runs left and right.
100%. This roster, from top to bottom, is actually very well constructed. Now, because they're playing Oracle Park, I tend to kind of give the Giants a lot of grace in this regard, but they are ranking in the top half to the top third of pretty much every offensive ranking in the National League. They're third in batting average, fifth in on base percentage, sixth overall OPS, second in batting WAR, that sort of thing. However, they are 10th in runs scored, which means that they're not generating a ton of runs overall. That said, they are second in runs against, the number one starters ERA and the number two bullpen ERA. So they're definitely playing to their park's strength, and it's one of those where their offense might be a little better than the stats show simply because of their home ballpark.
Yeah, and I think it'll help a lot that their long-term solution at second base, Diego Velasquez, will be coming off the IL soon. He's been out since mid-April with a torn labrum, and he's been really good on offense and defense. The last couple years, he's put up decent seasons, And he's been able to steal some bases while getting on base a ton, which helps obviously for that run scored. He's probably going to slot in maybe in that 5 hole right behind Moriguchi. And the Giants really just need some power at that bottom of the lineup to help push some more runs across. But if they can create some more runs outside the top 4 in their lineup, the Giants will be looking pretty strong coming down the stretch. Even with a less active trade deadline this year, Top Shelf is still as competitive as ever. Keep an eye on those tight division races as we grind out the second half of the 2031 season. This has been another episode of Spreadsheets and Sliders. We thank you as always for listening. Play ball!